Hello everybody, I'm Jordan, and today I'd like to teach you how to make a spinner in Jetpack Compose. So this spinner will look something like this at the very end, okay, and we'll be able to respond to dark mode changes as well. So let's get started. Alright, so to get started with this spinner, first thing we're going to make is a composable function. Let's create a spinner right here. Then we would like to accept a few parameters. So first would be our item list, which would be a list of strings. Then our selected item, which is going to display our currently selected item on the spinner, which is also a string. Now our on item selected lambda, which would take a string. And this method will get called every time we select an item from the spinner. So these are the three minimum things you need. I'll be expanding on it later. So the first thing we want to put is actually to remember whether our spinner is actually expanded. So let's create a variable that remembers if our spinner is actually showing the options. So it will start from mutable state of false. And especially now with Android, they always have this weird IDE issue. So the things to import is the compose set value and compose get value, like so. And then you can use the by remember savable, like so. So my whole spinner is actually made from a outlined button. So let's create that outlined button. Okay, we'll fill in the on click later. The outline button should contain some text, and the text should be your currently selected item. And I'll add in a few modifiers to it. The first thing is the overflow. I prefer it to be ellipsis. Okay, so if the option is way too long, it will just cut off the option and put 3 dots at the back. And then we just have its max lines equals to 1 so that it doesn't wrap around, so it doesn't show 2 lines when there's not enough space. Then the last modifier I want to put is the weight, okay, which is 1f. I want the text to take up as much space as possible. I want the text to take up as much space as possible on the outline button. The next thing I want to put is a icon. So the icon is just a little arrow next to a drop-down menu that you see in the default spinner from the XML version. So let's just take the icon's default arrow drop-down and let's put a content description of null. So after all this, okay, you have a little outline button. Okay. Now it's time to actually create the options that would show when you press the outline button. So we create this thing called a drop-down menu, and we tell it to expand when the expanded variable is equals to true. We'll fill in the onDismiss request later. So then we'll create the drop-down menu is just the menu itself. The menu needs some items inside, so we'll loop through the items like so to create drop-down menu items for it. So for each of the items in your item list, we create a drop-down menu item. It will fill in the on-click later. So within the drop-down menu item, we want to have some text which shows the item that you want to click on. So this is actually the basis of almost everything that our spinner needs, but let's fill in all the on-click. So for our drop-down menu item, when it's clicked, okay, we want it to do two things. One thing we want it to do is to first make the expanded to false. Okay, this closes the drop-down menu when we select an item. Next up, we want to call our method here on the item selected and tell it which item that you have actually selected. Next things to fill up is the drop-down menus onDismiss request. So onDismiss just means that you click off of the drop-down menu And this would just mean that we just make expanded to false, so that we close the drop-down menu as well. Lastly, on our on-click, we just want to make it so that our expanded is equals to true. And that's actually the entire code for our spinner. So to test it, let's create a few values. Okay, off. Okay, list of names. And then we also want to create a variable for the selected name, which is how we will use this spinner and get the name that has been selected. So remember savable. Mutable state off. Then we just put the spinner, fill in the item name, put in the selected name, and whenever the item has been selected, we put in a method that we make the selected name equals to the name that we have just selected. So when you run this, so now that the Gradle has finished building after 5 years, you can actually see that this is working pretty well. You can see that the name changes when you select it. But to actually just keep track, or actually just show that the name is actually, this selected name variable is actually working, I'm gonna put this in a column. Okay. And then we'll put the text to be of a selected name. Then if we run this again, you can see that this works just the way that a actual Android spinner usually works. So as I said in the beginning, there are some improvements that you can currently make to this spinner. So the one thing is that I made a little mistake at the beginning. By putting the drop-down menu here, you can see that it's actually affected by this column layout, right? So to fix that, just put the drop-down menu inside of the outline button. Then when we rerun it again, you can see that it works. The next thing is that this spinner currently doesn't have a modifier. So we can give it a modifier here. And then we have the outline button take after the modifier. So this then allows us to give it maybe some padding. Okay. Maybe for DP. For horizontal DP. Okay, and it's not accepting the DP, so for to import it from the compose UI. Then if we run it, you can see that it looks a little bit neater. The next thing is that currently our selected name, we need to actually fill this in. Now there will be some wonky behavior. But by default, the XML one just kind of selects the first name for you whenever you put in some data. So let's implement that functionality. So we have a temporary selected item and we make it to be the selected item. And we check if our temporary selected item is blank and that there are some items in the list. If there are, then we call on item selected on the first item in the item list, and then we change the temporary selected item to be the first item on the item list. Then we can just change the shown item as the temporary selected item. So by doing this, I can remove my name, the selected name, and you can see that it works just like before. Now another thing is that, let's just say you're getting this list of names from a database and they are not ready just yet. So you want it to not be selectable at all. So to do this, we just use the outline button and we make it so that it is not enabled when the item list is empty. When we run it, okay, I should remove this list, give it maybe a blank list, so it's like temporarily loading, and you can see that I can't click on the list itself. Finally, this is completely optional, but it just makes it look a little bit nicer. So by default, an XML spinner does look like this, but if you want to make it so that the arrows react to whether the thing is open or closed, we could just do it in Compose by checking if it's expanded. Then we make it so that the icons.default.keyboard arrow up when it's expanded, else we make it so that the icon is the keyboard arrow down icon. So running this again, I should probably put back the list of names. Can see that the arrow responds. This is just a visual change. There's not really a need to do this, but I personally like it that way. Okay. And that's about all for this little spinner tutorial. If you like it, please drop a like, and I hope you enjoy the video. Thanks for watching.